What's unsustainable? Debt. It's the end of the developed world debt supercycle. You in Canada know what the end of a debt supercycle looks like. It looks like 1993. Same thing in Sweden. It's a bitch. That's a technical economic term. It's no fun. I looked at your interest rates for your 30-year, 16%. Dear God in heaven. I mean, that happened for a little bit in the U.S., but then, you know, Volcker came along and cranked things down. One of the things that makes me have small glimmers of hope is that Jimmy Carter appointed Volcker as chair of the Federal Reserve. Obama's going to get to appoint a new chair in 2014. Could he appoint Richard Fisher, dear God, please, the president of the Dallas Fed? The only guy in 2007 who raised his hand at the Federal Reserve meeting said, guys, do you think we have a problem with this subprime thing? Because we're looking at it, these numbers are not. And Tim Geithner, the Secretary of State, said, it's contained, we got it under control. And then Fisher said, well, you know, by the way, we'd like a briefing on Bear Stearns because we're a little concerned about Bear Stearns down in Dallas, you know, out in the cheap seats. You don't need to know about that. We got it under control. That was Tim Geithner. I think he probably hurt his chances to be Federal Reserve Chairman. I certainly hope so. So maybe, I mean, if the United States survived Jimmy Carter, we can get through Obama. And maybe Obama will appoint a Paul Volcker type person to be chairman of the Fed. But in any event, Europe is running out of its ability to borrow money, not out of their ability to print money. They can print money. They got a press. Japan's getting ready to come up to its ability to borrow money because, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. As that changes, the world's got to change. And that's a different world. It's a different investing world than what we've been living in for the last 10, 12 years, as volatile as that has been. Second thing that's going to change is unbalanced entitlement promises, primarily pension and health care, especially in Japan. Japan's a dying country. I mean, they're literally shrinking. We've never seen anything like that in the history of the world. By the way, China falls off a cliff in 15 years. This year, their working cohort, the 15 to 65, 15 to 64, that age, shrinks compared to the people who are on entitlements. I mean, who are on retirement and young. That's odd. They are going to be the first nation to grow old before they grow rich. The first developed world, you know, growing nation like that. They're not, because they have the one-child policy. And in 15 years, they literally hit a demographic cliff. It's not like the slow fade that Japan's doing. That's going to be interesting. 100 years from now, we'll look back and go, wow, now we know not to do that. The world, and especially progress, is not linear. The New York Times this Sunday, guy was writing a piece about people who were thinking negatively about the future, and he called me, he specifically named me as this doomsday thinker. Used the word doomsday right next to my name. And it's cool with the New York Times. I'm sitting on the plane coming up to Toronto. You can just type a note in and say, Alan, I am not some doom and gloom guy. I'm an irrational optimist. And I get a note back about 15 minutes later and says, you know, I worried about whether that is quite fair. It turns out he's a reader, and we're going to get together tomorrow, I guess. Tomorrow's Tuesday. But the world is not linear. We're getting ready to see a faster pace of accelerating change. It's positive. Nobody in 2034 or 2022 is going to want to come back to the good old days of 2013. Technology is going to be so much cooler. Healthcare is going to be so much better. We're all going to be excited about what's going to happen. So I'm not saying that food's not unsustainable. We can grow all the food we want in the world. We'll have enough. We may not be able to grow it where we want to. We may have to grow it somewhere else and move it, but we can do that. We're not going to run out of energy. Dear God, is anybody paying attention to what's happened down south of you? I mean, we're finding some oil and gas. Maybe someday we can export it to you guys. I think it's going to be kind of funny. They're finally going to get the Keystone Pipeline through, and about that time we're going to be using the Keystone Pipeline to put our gas in to send out. We're going to be shipping it from McAllen, Texas in 3 years. How cool is that? $80 billion a year that we'll be shipping out of the U.S. That'll help our trade deficit a little bit. Where are the other current sources of unsustainability? It's Japan, Europe, the U.S., and perhaps China this year. Eventually China becomes unsustainable. They have a different type of unsustainability though. They've just got to figure out how to go from a foreign investment world, bank-driven world, to a consumer world. And that's going to be bumpy for them. But societies have figured out how to do that. That's different than Japan, Europe, the US. They're going to have to figure out how to change how they do their taxes, change how they do their spending, change how they do their entitlements. Japan, I wrote my book, Endgame. How many of you bought my book, Endgame? Thank you so much. I'll make 87 cents a book, I think. It's important to me. I'm working on I've got another book that I'm working on right now. Every time I look up, it's on the future of employment. And my partner, co-author that I wrote Endgame with, wants me to do a book on currency wars with him. And he says, we need to do it now. I said, well, we said 2014. No, we need to do it now. This is the year. So I don't know. Anyway, so I'll be doing more books. If you see me starting to write a lot about currency and currency wars and currency valuations in the letter, you can know that I agreed to do the book. Japan, I wrote, was a bug in search of a windshield. I think 2013 is the year of the windshield. This is the year when Japan begins to go down. Now, as I wrote in my letter, I am investing about 20% of my portfolio short Japan. That's a major, major allocation for me. It's too much for any of you. Don't do it. You know, do as I say, not as I do. However, I'm convinced. I think this is going to be one of the big macro moves of my lifetime. I really believe that this time, the Bank of Japan, who I said was the most incompetent central bank in the world back in 2003 when I wrote Bullseye Investing, because they couldn't even figure out how to destroy their own currency. I think they're going to figure it out. And they're going to destroy their currency. Now, I'm not shorting Japan bonds. That'll still be a graveyard. But the yen, I'm going to actually buy a home, I think, at the end of this year when my lease is up. And I'm putting together a mortgage right now, the equivalent of a yen-based mortgage. And, you know, somebody says, why didn't you do it last December, November when you were telling everybody to do it? I said, well, I'm lazy. Not lazy, I just procrastinated. But anything under 100 is fine. It's going to 200, guys. You know, it may take 5 to 7 years, but they're committed, just like everybody else is going to be committed, to destroying their currencies. We'll talk about what to do with that in a minute. Japan private sector debt has gone down while public sector debt has gone up. It's at 230% now. They're printing 45 to 50% of their budget is debt. They're pretty soon going to have to be printing all of that. That's not a sustainable number. It's going to, the yen's going to drop a little bit, it'll go sideways and it'll come up some, and everybody goes, oh, it's over. Then it'll drop some more. And then some prime minister will stamp his foot and say, we're not going to allow that. And it'll go back up for a little bit, and then it's going to go down some more. It's unsustainable until you see them saying, we're going to cut our deficit, rather than trying to figure out how to create bigger deficits and spend more money. I mean, they're taking the Paul Krugman school of Keynesian economics to its logical extension, which is print anything on any piece of paper that you possibly can. Spend more money. We're going to spend our way out of a debt problem. Okay? It's a concept. And if it turns out to be the right concept, I will have to renounce my economic views, put my hands on Keynes's general monetary theory, and swear to become a Keynesian. Don't think it's going to happen, but if it works, hey, I've got to, I'll have to rethink my world. Public debt to GDP. Now, this is from the Bank of International Settlements. You can see that the top checked line is what the world would be if entitlements don't change. The middle is with some cuts. The bottom line is what they would term full-on austerity, full draconian cuts. And you can see the United States is still unsustainable with full draconian cuts. We can't do it. The United Kingdom, they're twice as bad as we are. England's in a world of hurt. They're up to their derriere in beef Wellington. I mean, it's not good. Now, oh, you can see Japan's in there like 600% or something like that. Just, yes, they can't do it. Spain, Now, here's the cool thing. I want you to look at Greece and France. France is in the middle. Greece is on the lower left over there. If you time shift that 5 years, Greece looks like France. France is going to become the new Greece. 4 years ago, I was telling you Greece wasn't going to pay. They were going to default. 2 years ago, when we wrote the book, we said Spain will default. They're not going to be able to pay their debt. Default is an ugly word. Maybe we just change the terms. We stretch them out. We lower the interest rates. We renegotiate. We don't actually default. We give you something for them. We're not Greece. It just says we can't pay you, which, by the way, they can't. The IMF paper that came out last week, 272 pages of analysis on Greece. It didn't take me that long to be able to figure out they can't pay their debt. But they announced that possibly, maybe, it looks like, sort of, that the ECB and the IMF and the Eurozone are going to have to maybe renegotiate some of their debt and forgive some of the Greek debt because they really can't pay it. Which, when you see the chief economic advisor to the prime minister saying, we can't pay this, they're going to have to renegotiate it. I mean, that's pretty much the mindset. They've run out of money. They literally don't have it. I mean, it's a dangerous game they're playing. They're trying to cut it as fast as they can without creating social unrest and social instability. We'll see what happens. I hope they make it. It's a wonderful country. It's beautiful. Everybody should. Greece is going to be on sale this summer. If you ever want to take a Greek vacation, you should go to Greece this summer. In another 6 months to a year, if you want to buy a little Greek island, they're going to be there. Some thoughts about austerity. Of course it doesn't work. You're cutting GDP. Everybody says, well, what we want is a magic button, some pixie dust that we can sprinkle on the economy and make it grow. Austerity isn't going to make you grow, it's going to reduce your deficit. Those are two opposite things. By definition, if you reduce government spending, you're going to reduce GDP in the short run. That's just the rules. Accounting 101. So, all the Keynesians and, big government types just, see, we told you austerity wouldn't work. And my answer is, well, it's actually doing what it was designed to do, which is cut the deficit, because nobody would lend you money. I mean, if you're willing to give Greece money for the next 20 years so that they can live the lifestyle, whatever they want to, then fine. Don't tell them to cut any money. Don't make them go through austerity. Just keep giving them German taxpayer money. I don't care. But I got to tell you, if Illinois comes to Texas and asks for money so that they can fund their pension programs, you know what we're going to tell them in Texas? Check you later, guys. Love you. Appreciate all you do for the United States. And we wish you the best, but you can't have any of our money. And that's pretty much going to be the answer of most of the other states. They're going to have to figure out how to deal with their own deficits, which means that Illinois will probably, they won't default, they're just going to restructure their pensions. They owe $50 billion of unfunded pension liabilities. That's assuming that they can make 8% on their markets for the rest of the next 10 years, which they can't, because they've got bond interest portfolios that are giving them 3%. It means they're going to have to get 12 or 13% from their equity portfolios, which they're not going to get. So they're going to have to restructure their pension portfolios, because that $50 billion, if they took $5 billion a year for the next 10 years, that's a third of the state budget. They're not putting anything in now. They got to take a third of the state budget, and they're already losing money. It's not a working model. They can't raise taxes anymore. There's nothing to cut. They're going to have to cut their pensions. They're going to have to cut their obligations. It's going to be ugly in the state of Illinois. This is total federal obligations as a percent of GDP in the U.S. The obligations being the pensions and liabilities. One bubble to rule them all. Remember Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all? That was supposed to be my allusion there to literary greatness. Tolkien was the greatest writer of the last century, by the way. Those numbers can't work. Things will have to change, and they will.